This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Zach Pereles. I want to talk some UVA basketball. We've had a chance to digest Virginia's win last night in the Dean Dome, 69-61 win over number 8 North Carolina in a game that, aside from about an 8.5-minute stretch of the second half, Virginia really played well. 7-point lead at halftime, 26-12 run to close things out in the last 11:32. But that 8.5-minute stretch of the second half, starting the second half, North Carolina, a 17-3 run during one of that, a big part of that stretch, turned an 8-point deficit into a 6-point lead and seemed to have everything going in this direction. And Zach, Virginia able to turn things around. I guess it was so stark how I guess what I love what you wrote in one of your columns last night about how that really showed the mettle of this UVA team, that it was able to, on the road against a strong opponent like UNC, 48 hours after losing to Duke at home, able to suck it up and do what it did to pull the win out last night.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that. The final 8.5 minutes, essentially it kind of looked like UVA was either running out of gas and they were kind of, they were losing their composure a bit, and UNC was just going to run away with the game. And I kind of started it with the premise of who could blame UVA. They had just played Duke. They had to make that trip down to Chapel Hill. It was a tough turnaround for any team. It's tough to play any two teams within a 48-hour span. When you're playing two top 10 teams in the nation, that's really, really difficult. If UVA had just not been able to pull it out, it would have been disappointing for sure, but who could blame them? And then all of a sudden they turn the entire script of the game around. They start hitting shots. They start breaking the press. But I think the thing that I came back to is the defense was absolutely phenomenal. North Carolina misses 10 of their final 11 shots. I mean, that's not something that you see from North Carolina teams. This was the second leading team in the nation coming into this game. So to see UVA kind of fall back to its defensive principles and get those stops down the stretch, it just showed that they can rely on their defense and timely offense to win big games.
Yeah, and I'll interject some of my observations here. I was going to save those for later, but talking about the defense, Carolina started 8 of 14 from the floor second half, scored 20 points in that first 8:28, because it was the 11:32 media timeout where things turned around. To that stage, K.A. Clark had played 27 minutes of the 28.5 minutes of possible game time. He didn't play the rest of the way. The idea, he started the game for a healthy Mamadi Diakite. There was question, as you wrote over the weekend, there was question about Diakite's health. He had that collision, the freak collision with DeAndre Hunter in the first half of the Duke game. Did not play the second half of the Duke game, but was cleared to play. He was ready to go. Just a healthy scratch in terms of starting. Ends up playing 23 minutes off the bench for Virginia. But Clark was inserted in the starting lineup and was there to guard Kobe White, who's now, point guard, the engine of that North Carolina offense, had scored 33 against Miami just 2 days before last night's game. But at 6'5", a bit of a height advantage over the 5'9" Clark. But the idea, I'm sure, from Tony Bennett was, hey, let's see what we can do in terms of slowing North Carolina down, maybe putting some ball pressure on White, and that might have an impact. But White was 6 of 10 from the floor at the 11:32 timeout. He had 15 points, 2 turnovers, but just 2 turnovers, and the North Carolina offense really purring at that stage. Afterwards, after the sub out of Clark and also Jack Salt subbed out, DeAndre Hunter was the primary defender on White at 6'7". So you go from 5'9" Clark, ball hawk, to 6'7". Hunter can obviously he can keep up with guys from 1 through 5 defensively, but he's a different defender. He's not going to get up in your face 94 feet like Clark will, but he'll make things tough when you're trying to shoot the ball over him with his length. And from that stage on, 0 of 7 from the floor for White, 2 points, both on free throws. And I thought that was key. Virginia slowing down North Carolina with Hunter, I thought was, as much as anything else, we heard so much after the game about Tony Bennett yelling at his team and getting on them and, a rare outburst from Tony Bennett. I think as much as that outburst, I think it was the strategy of switching from Clark to Hunter on White that was the key down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that length. I think that's one thing that bothered Kobe White. When you think about, he's been so good recently, but you think about he kept North Carolina in that Miami game for stretches on Saturday. He was going against Chris Lights, who's about Kihei Clark's size.
Yeah.
So I think that length, again, DeAndre Hunter, and that was one of the things that I talked about a little bit in my column as well. DeAndre Hunter, it seems like there are times in the game where he kind of disappears, but down the stretch, you have to credit him for playing really well on both ends. And, Roy Williams after the game was questioned. Someone asked him, what about Kobe White? Another big game for him points-wise, which is true. And he said, I love the guy. He's been great for us. He's a great offensive player. But he went 6 for 19. I can't, love him all that much after this game. And, truth be told, him going 6 for 19 was kind of the story of the game for North Carolina. They had about a 10-minute stretch where they were really good. And the other 30 minutes of the game, UVA pretty much controlled.
And Hunter, it's weird to say this for a guy who had 20 points and was the key defensively in the last 11:30, but it felt like a quiet 20, you don't really notice defense. I mean, if you're a Virginia fan, you notice defense, but, and his 20 points, it wasn't like he had a flurry of points. He didn't have alley-oop dunks. He just was so coolly efficient. He shot the ball 10 times from the floor. He was 7 of 10, 3 of 3 from 3. He only got to the line 4 times, so it's not like, again, when you sometimes talk about a guy having a quiet, offensive night, maybe it's because he's getting the foul. He just made the shots. He just played defense. Didn't draw attention to himself. He's not Zion Williamson blocking a shot to the 15th row of the lower section or anything else, but he just did all those things, and he did them all well. A quiet assassin, maybe, if you want to say about DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah, I can't remember a quieter 20 points in such an important game, too. I think that one of the things that I liked a lot from DeAndre Hunter was he settled for fewer mid-range jumpers, and he's a really good mid-range jump shooter, but one of the things that, basketball is moving towards now is you either want to shoot threes or you want to get high percentage finishes at the rim. And when you looked at his first half, it was interesting. He had 10 points in each half. And I was looking back and trying to remember his first half. He had 2 dunks and 2 threes. And you can't get a whole lot more efficient than that. I thought he was terrific. Again, the only 10 shots, but he hit all 3 of his three-pointers. He was absolutely terrific. It was a quiet, he wasn't the guy hitting the threes down the stretch. That was Kyle Guy. And he wasn't the guy who you pointed to as the guy who set up Kyle Guy. That was Ty Jerome. But in the end, when you look back at this box score, you see Kyle Guy's big game and you see DeAndre Hunter's incredibly efficient game. And it was interesting. There were times where it seemed like he could be a little bit more aggressive and look for his own shot. But the two possession sequence that I was really impressed with was UVA was down 59 to 57. Hunter got the ball kind of up top, drove with his left hand and finished really well, layup right at the rim to tie things at 59. And then the exact same sequence unfolded. He drove to the basket. 2 guys came over for North Carolina to help, and Hunter found Jay Huff just in the nick of time just before he landed, and Huff finished. It gave UVA its first lead in over 11 minutes, and he never trailed after that.
I wanted to talk about 2 other guys who, Huff being one of them, who didn't put much up on the scoreboard at least. Huff with 2 points, those 2 points. He missed the free throw on what would have been an and one at the 3:12 mark, but those 2 points were the eventual game-winning points. Virginia didn't trail after that at least. And Braxton Key had 1 point, but he played the last 14, 32 or so, I think it was. He checked in at that stage, didn't come back out. 6 rebounds, team best on a night when Virginia got out-rebounded pretty significantly, but also his defense was key. It's just so funny to see. This tells you how Virginia basketball works. Kyle Guy 20 points, DeAndre Hunter 20 points, Ty Jerome, who we'll talk about in a few moments, 15 points, 11 assists, and they all had good shooting nights too. They weren't artificial numbers. They weren't throwing the ball up a lot. very efficient offensive game for the big three. But it's a guy like Braxton Key with 1 point playing the last 14 and a half minutes. And Huff only played 8 minutes last night, but he played – these were the most significant minutes he's played in his 3 years, including his redshirt year, obviously, at UVA. He checked in just under 7 minutes to go. It was like 6:52 to go. He checked back out with 58 seconds to go. When he checked in, Virginia's down 4. He checks out, they're up 6. And I don't think it's an accident that, he only scores 2 points. He has 1 rebound. He has 1 steal officially in that 6-minute stretch. But I don't think it's coincidence that the 4-point deficit turned into a 6-point lead with him on the floor. He played good team defense. He authored a couple of shots. And just him being on the floor stretches out a defense and opens up opportunities for his teammates. Those were 6 minutes that I think can reverberate for this UVA basketball team. The fact that he was on the floor during this stretch, he has Tony Bennett's trust to be on the floor for such key minutes. I think that can be something that really pays dividends down the road for this UVA team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that you noticed there is UVA was down and they needed points. And who did they turn to? They turned to Jay Huff. And he's a guy who we know that he can do some really special things offensively. He didn't really have a great game, offensively. He missed a couple short ones that he'd probably like to have back. But again, he was on the floor. It did, the defense during that time actually was better. And it was just interesting to me to see that he would go. I was surprised that he didn't go with more Mamadi Diakite down that stretch, but it does show, like you mentioned, that he's earned Tony Bennett's trust in big moments. A couple weeks ago, they were in another close game, actually also down in North Carolina, just a few minutes away at NC State. And he got the important minutes down the stretch and in overtime there as well. So I think the thing that we're seeing is Jack Salt's a guy who's, tough as nails. Any other traditional big man back to the basket, he's going to be the guy that's going to get the minutes. Mamadi's going to be the guy if the other team relies solely on, or not solely, but if they rely a lot on a talented scoring big man who can shoot it from the outside. And then Jay Huff is kind of a guy who's going to be in there for his offense, yes, but also if the team's playing well, Tony Bennett's not going to take him out. And he has the highest box plus minus, which is essentially how much better the team is on the court compared to the opponent. And on UVA, obviously Grant Kersey has the best. Who can forget the walk-on star? But, Jay Huff, when he's been on the court, good things have happened for UVA. It's not necessarily that he's been great every single time, but in general, UVA has been better with him on the court. And I understand, people always want more minutes for a guy who can score like he can and do some of the things on both ends that he can. But I think what we're seeing is that Tony Bennett recognizes that the team plays well when he's on the floor, and there's something to be said for that. And so when he needed his team to play his best, he had Jay Huff out there.
What can we say about Ty Jerome except for what the word heroic should only apply to things where people are in life or death situations, but boy, he's a guy who, hurt his back a couple weeks ago. He had to miss the Miami game. He played well against Duke. And then last night, you see during timeouts, he's not even sitting with the team. He's sitting on the padded chair on the actual bench, getting treated during those timeout breaks for many of those timeouts. But he has 15 points, 11 assists, only 2 turnovers in 37 minutes, running this offense against a Carolina team that's one of the better Carolina defensive teams we've seen in the last few years. What else can we say positive about Ty Jerome other than what a game for a guy? Even if he's healthy, that's a heck of a game. But considering the health circumstances he's going through right now, that's an incredible game.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. He was terrific, and he wasn't the leading scorer, he wasn't the leading rebounder, he was the leading assist guy, and I think that's the thing that stood out to me the most. I was going through the post-game box score, and I saw 11 assists, and I said, well, 11 assists when a team only scores 69 points, that's pretty impressive. And then I saw UVA only made 24 shots. He's assisted on almost half of their points, and he assisted on almost half of their field goals. And, of course, you also have to add in the field goals that he made himself. he was responsible for so much of the offense last night. I think one of the things that you realize with Ty Jerome is that it doesn't matter if he's, being held together with glue and duct tape. He's a guy who's going to give it his all, and he's going to make the smart plays and the right plays down the stretch. And we saw in that game, they made the right plays. They got Kyle Guy open on 2 sets that I feel like Virginia's been running for, since the beginning of time. And North Carolina knew it was coming. One of them was a pin down screen from Jay Huff, and they just couldn't get around the screen. Kyle Guy buries that corner 3. Then the other one, Kyle's coming up, kind of curling off Jay Huff, coming down to the block, hits another 3. That was the one where Kenny Williams fouled him. And you see, there's just such great chemistry between Guy and Jerome. Jerome knows exactly where he wants it. He knows down to the inch where Kyle Guy's going to set up, where he wants to catch the ball so that he can get the ball off as quickly as he does. And those 2 threes were essentially the difference in the game.
Yeah, we talked about the health issues. He was diminished in the NC State game. I don't know what play it was in that game, but clearly Ty wasn't 100% healthy for much of that game. He missed the Miami game. You have to wonder about his health and his abilities during the Duke game. Last night we saw him at closer to 100% at least in terms of productivity, and so I don't think it's a surprise that Kyle Guy has the game he has. 7 of 13 from the floor, 5 of 9 from 3. And made his last 4 shots, 11 points in that closing stretch. As the UVA offense heated up, he was a key reason for that. Kyle had, during that stretch where Ty missed the Miami game and was diminished in the NC State and Duke games, Kyle struggled. You talk about the chemistry between he and Ty. He was 31.7% from the floor in that 3-game stretch, 27.3% from 3. I attributed that especially the Miami game, I guess, when Ty wasn't even on the floor at all in that game, missed that game with the injury. I attributed Kyle's struggles to the struggles of Ty, either being out of the lineup or being, not being 100%. And so it's not a surprise to me, I guess, that seeing Ty closer to 100% helps us also see Kyle closer to 100%. I guess your thoughts on that, because Kyle had a game last night that was more reminiscent of what we'd seen from him prior to this little stretch recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those 2 guys have just developed such great chemistry. And, when Ty Jerome is in the game, he's a guy who can make plays for himself, but he's also extremely unselfish, sometimes almost to a fault, I think. He's a guy who's just willing to make the pass to the guy when it needs to be there, and it's on time and on target. I think one of the things that I was impressed with, Kyle Guy gave a great quote, and I'm pulling it up here. He said, Coach drew those up, and hats off to him. He's really good at drawing up quick hitters, and Ty found me. I don't need much time to shoot. That's something I've worked for. I think the biggest thing for me, I know I'm a very confident person, and I know that I've worked for everything that I've gotten. But I think it means the world to me when someone like Ty has more confidence in me than sometimes I do. So, again, it's 2 guys who, you can be a great basketball player, but if the guys around you don't have confidence in you and you don't have confidence in them, it's going to be hard to put together a good product. So, for me, I think that the confidence and the chemistry between those 2 guys is something that's shown and especially showed on Monday night.
So turnovers have been an issue. Now, I'll say this. As much as the media narrative after the game was, Tony yelled at the team during that media timeout and they played better afterwards. Yes, that there was one factor of that. Now, I still think it was the paring down the bench, the move to put Hunter on White that were key, using Huff to help open up the offense. But one area where he specifically said in his postgame that he yelled at the team was about turnovers. And at that stage of the game, Virginia had 10 turnovers. At the 11:32 mark, second half, they had 10 turnovers in the game. They had 7 in the first half, so 3 about halfway through the second half. So you're still on pace for 14 turnovers, which had been the average in the last 3 games going into last night. From that time on, last turnover in the game for Virginia, in fact, was around the 12.5-minute mark last night. So no turnovers after the tongue lashing from Coach Bennett. I wonder how much it was the tongue lashing and maybe the different lineup that was a little more effective, but still. So turnovers have been an issue, but they addressed it in those last 10 minutes. And probably not a surprise that because they cleaned things up, The offense scores 26 points in the last 11:30. So, is this something we can think that maybe it's fixed, and whether it was a tongue lashing or just a better offensive unit out there, is this something that we can maybe feel has been addressed now?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's important there, you notice, those no turnovers down the stretch. It also comes with really good defense down the stretch, and therefore North Carolina can't get into its press break. North Carolina can't get into its press. They can't force turnovers as quickly. So it starts on the defensive end. If UVA continues to give up buckets there, then they have to break the press, which we saw they couldn't do well. So once Virginia started getting stops, they started being able to run their offense more easily, and those two go hand in hand. I hope, you hope that it's something that they figured out. They have a long time, between now and Notre Dame to figure out, if they're over those turnover issues. I think the big thing for them is that teams can see that if you pressure UVA a little bit, they can have some trouble. Even if that's not a full court press, even if that's just kind of extending your half court defense a little bit. So I think UVA will especially try to work on, when teams try to get a little bit more up in our face and try to push us away from the basket, how can we beat that aggression or take advantage of it? We saw a few backdoor cuts last night. We saw a couple times where, guys were able to get into the lane off dribble drives. So I think that'll be one thing that UVA looks to take advantage of moving forward and be more well prepared for.
Yeah, Kihei had an ugly turnover coming out of a timeout against the that sort of half-court trap pressure that you often see from Carolina out of a timeout. Just wasn't prepared for that, and you could see that Coach Bennett was as mad at himself as anything else for not prepping the team for that. Now, here I'll speculate on something, Zach, and so I want to drag you into unfairly speculating with me, perhaps. Ty Jerome last night played great, but he was still obviously not 100% in terms of at least just the fact that he was, getting those treatments during timeouts and that kind of thing. I wonder with Notre Dame coming up on Saturday at home, a rematch of a game Virginia won on the road by 27 points here a couple weeks ago, if we might not see Ty play this weekend, especially with another Saturday, Monday back-to-back coming up with the road game at Virginia Tech Monday night. I guess I'll say, editorially speaking now, I kind of hope he doesn't play Saturday just to, give him a little bit more time to rest and get, as close to right as he needs to be for Monday night. I don't know about the status of Justin Robinson, certainly for Virginia Tech. Nobody does, it doesn't seem, except for, I guess, people within their locker room. That boot going up to his knee doesn't look like a good sign for that program, him coming back anytime soon. But, I guess if you have to choose, and I wonder last night after seeing Ty getting the treatment, you might have to choose. He played this stretch. He played Duke. He played UNC. Helped Virginia get the win last night. Maybe he's earned himself some time off. Again, just speculation on my part. And so now, Zach, I'll ask you to speculate with me.
I wish that I could agree with you there. I think he'll play. He's a gamer. He's a guy who wants to be out there. Although I'll side with you a little bit. I think that if they can limit his minutes, then they'd love to. I think the primary reason for playing Ty Jerome is that if you can get up by 10 points or 15 points or build that lead to a substantial advantage, he doesn't have to. There's not a huge difference between him practicing at 60 or 70 or 80 or even 100% and him playing 20 or 22 minutes in a game. So I think what UVA would ideally want to do is have Ty Jerome play but not log heavy minutes. And the thing is, I think he's also going to improve between now and this weekend. So it'll be one of these things where if Ty Jerome, comes out after 5 more days of treatment and rest and says, I'm feeling significantly better and I can play 35 minutes again, then they'll probably do that. But if he's still not feeling great, if he's not feeling 100%, if you're not seeing significant progress, I still think he plays, but I'm not 100% sure that he gets the normal minutes that he would. And maybe that opens some more minutes for, a 4-guard lineup, but a bigger 4-guard lineup that would feature Kihei Clark, Kyle Guy, Braxton Key, and DeAndre Hunter around one of the big men.
For our listeners out there, we may have to do a GoFundMe to endow some Icy Hot We're going to be needing some, it seems like, for Ty coming up down the stretch here. I wrote Aspercream aided game last night, but I read after the game, after I'd written that it was actually icy out, which makes sense. Something hot on the back makes you feel loosened up. One other thing to address, and you wrote about this in your post-game column last night, Zach. Offensive rebounds. Last night, certainly, North Carolina stayed in the game. Offensive rebounds, 15-2 advantage in second chance points. I think they had 16 offensive rebounds among their 40 misses. Virginia 24 defensive rebound. That's 40% rebounding right there. And this is a trend. And this is unfortunately a trend. The last 4 games now, Virginia has had some issues on the backboards. Talk about this and maybe what Virginia can do to shore this up.
Yeah, that's been an interesting area of weakness. And I was looking back to see, has Virginia historically struggled on the boards? And they haven't. But there have been some stretches like this. I believe last year there was a game where Syracuse grabbed over half of their misses and UVA managed to come out with a win. But there have been a few stretches here and there where UVA hasn't been the best defensive rebounding team. I think that one of the things there is Ty Jerome's health, first of all. He's not, always going to – he's obviously always giving his best effort, but it's tough for him to box out right now given his health. I think that, we can take those numbers with a grain of salt. I believe UNC grabbed 3 offensive rebounds in the last 15 seconds as UVA essentially just gave up and didn't want to foul up 8 points. And ironically, fittingly, they missed all 4 of their shots on the final possession. So that was, a pretty fitting end to a tough night for the Tar Heels. But I do agree with you. One of the things that I've noticed is opponents have been shooting more threes against UVA. The last 2 games, 52 threes have been shot by Duke and UNC combined. That's a lot of threes, which means a lot of offensive long rebounds, which means more offensive rebounding opportunities. I think what you'll see is UVA will want to emphasize with its guards to box out and then have its big men kind of realizing that those deeper shots are going to produce deeper rebounds if they miss. So, that number of 16, I think, offensive rebounds, it's a little bit stunted by some, last-minute efforts or last-second efforts, really, by UNC. But again, I think it's a team-wide thing. If all 5 guys are boxing out, there should be no reason to give up an offensive rebound. And Duke and UNC, gives them credit. They're really good offensive rebounding teams. But I think UVA knows that it has to take care of the defensive boards, and that starts with getting all 5 guys getting in solid defensive rebounding position, and then just being a little bit more alert. There seemed to be a couple 50-50 balls that UVA didn't get to when they seemed to be closer to the ball. It just seems like there were a few times where UVA wasn't quite alert where the ball was or quite alert to getting on the floor before a UNC player did. But again, it's one of these things where it's a 5-man deal to rebound. I know only one person can grab a defensive rebound, but all 5 people have to do their job so that one person can grab it. And I think, a one-man breakdown, trying to grab a defensive board can cause a team to never get a defensive rebound. So all 5 guys, I think, that'll be an area that they'll work on going forward.
What's interesting, as you're talking about that, I thought to look up teamrankings.com just to get a sense. Defensive rebounding percentage this year, Virginia is actually a little improved over last year season-wide. 77.1% this year, 76.5% last year. Last 3 games, though, 71.3%, of course, last night, 60%. So, yes, season-long, this had not been an issue. And I think when you look at last 3 games, you're talking about that period of time. Ty Jerome not being 100% healthy, guys are either playing out of position a little bit with him off the floor in the Miami game or last night. Certainly he's not able to maybe quite do what he normally does defensively. So, and of course, Carolina traditionally is a very good offensive rebounding team. Maybe not this year as much as in past years, but a little factor there. But, it is something that the season numbers and the last 3 or 4 games numbers not matching up. So something that Virginia will definitely have to address. The turnovers and then the rebounding, 2 big factors. Also, when I was looking these numbers up, Zach, I accidentally clicked the first time on offensive rebound percentage, just tricking myself into thinking, oh, yeah, offensive rebounds. And actually, Virginia's offensive rebound percentage up significantly from last year, 24.5% last year, 30.1% this year. So, for a system that relies on everybody coming back, nobody really, running in to get those rebounds offensively, they are maybe putting a little more emphasis on that, and maybe why the offense is a bit more efficient this year. So, rebounding in general is an issue. Virginia will definitely have to address that. That's interesting observations there, though, that you see here as far as that goes. So this is Tuesday. This is a hard part now. It's great that we have a few days off before Saturday after a win at North Carolina, so that's good. But also now we got to figure out what to do the next few days because I guess tonight root for Louisville against Duke. The Cardinals hosting the Blue Devils, and then getting ready for Saturday. What do we have to look forward to from you this week, Zach? Getting us ready for the weekend.
Sure, absolutely. The first thing that I'll be doing is I'll be sending all my best wishes to Ty Jerome's back. And then after that, I'm thinking I might even do some film study on Ty Jerome, see what he was so good at, especially in that UNC game. I mean, again, I'll emphasize it again because it blew my mind. 14 assists on 24 made shots. That's almost half already. And then you consider that Ty Jerome made shots as himself as well. So that's a really good, that's a really, really impressive passing performance from him. So what did he do especially well there? And then I think what we're going to move into as we get into Valentine's Day is we're going to, see, is UVA still deserving of that one seed? Obviously on February 9th, which was a Saturday, they released their first bracket preview, which I actually like. I like that the NCAA selection committee is doing this, and you can kind of see some trends emerge. UVA's gone 1-1 since. They dropped a spot in the AP poll. Are they still worthy of a number one seed? What do they need to do as we hit the stretch run to make sure that they stay a number one seed? So that'll be coming to you on Valentine's Day. So whoever's listening to this podcast, you have some good things to talk about during your Valentine's Day dinner. And then Friday, we've got our Notre Dame preview, and then Notre Dame coverage on Saturday. And again, I believe another bracket reveal. So we'll see if, my words from Thursday actually turn true, or if the NCAA tournament committee decides to move them somewhere other than that one line.
A lot to look forward to as we get through a long week without UVA basketball. Well, Zach, thanks for your time as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.